We're now ready for our next presentation from Dr. Frank Veer. Frank is an attending physician in the emergency department at Freeman Health System in Joplin, Missouri. For the last several years, he has been the Residency Program Director for Emergency Medicine and the Medical Director for the Joplin SWAT team. When you hear Joplin, one word tends to come to mind now. And that word, as you see on the screen, is a tornado. Frank was on duty when that F5 tornado struck, destroying, and I was amazed when I heard this number, destroying 50% of the healthcare in the city. Frank, thanks very much for joining us today.
All right. Thank you for that introduction. I appreciate it. My name is Frank Veer. I guess at the beginning of all these talks, we have to disclose any financial conflicts of interest that we have. Unfortunately, I have none to disclose. I am very open to being conflicted, though, so if any of you have any money, So we're going to talk a little bit about the tornado. We're going to talk a lot about the tornado. We're going to talk about the effect on the two hospitals that we have in town, St. John's and Freeman, and St. John's now being Mercy, and also some ways that it kind of changed our practices. So Joplin is a town that is a decent-sized town. We've got about 50,000 people in Joplin proper. In the surrounding areas, we have about 250,000 people. They say that during the day, we swell to about 400,000 people within a 40-mile area there of Joplin. So we have a decent population that we serve. As you can see, we're kind of spread out in the middle of nowhere here. You know, we got a long ways to go to get to anywhere. You got 75 miles to get to the next big city, which is Springfield. And then the next large hospitals are a good hour and a half to 2.5 hours away. We've got schools just like every place. Some of those are kind of come into play on the day of the tornado. Joplin High School was having their graduation. They had changed the location of it, luckily. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But there were about 7,000 people at this graduation. And we'll talk a little bit later why that could have been really important. So the two hospitals that we have, as you can see before the tornado, pretty darn equal. The two hospitals, they're the only two in town. They spent so much money on advertising, which I thought was silly, because they're the only two in town. Where else are you going to go? You know? But they did. And they were pretty darn equal. And we always said, you know, that any disagreements the hospitals had was always at the administrative level, not at the level of docs and nurses and techs and that sort of thing. Everybody got along within the healthcare community pretty well, but everybody agreed it's a waste of money. Not only are they the only two in town, you can't go anywhere else, neither one could survive without the other. I mean, both were fairly busy. So as you can see from our numbers here, pretty darn equal. Not huge hospitals, but hospitals that took care of our community pretty well. Well, on Sunday, May 22nd, my lovely bride here with our little kiddos and the toy bomb that went off behind them, we're down at my in-laws' house in another city altogether. And I had worked a full shift in the ER. That's another thing about the tornado. It couldn't come at the beginning of my shift. Had to wait till the end of my shift. And we were having a barbecue for the residents. It was going to be at one of the residents' house. And she was driving up from my in-laws, and she called me and said, you know, the weather looks really, really bad. You know, it's a bad storm. She doesn't like driving at night. She doesn't like driving in the storm. Doesn't like driving with 3 screaming kids in the back. And she said, I'm going to go back to my folks' house and just kind of going to ride this out a little bit. So I had been waiting in my office for her, got that phone call, so I thought, well, I'm going to head on home then, and I'll catch up with her once the storm's passed, and we'll go over to the barbecue. And my office is not real important, so my office is stuck way in the middle of the hospital with no windows. And it sounded like this massive helicopter landed on the hot pad to our ER. And I thought, well, shoot, I want to go see what the heck that is. So I walked through the ER on my way out, and I'll pick up that story in a second here. It was Sunday, as you can see here. I guess you guys can't see when I point at the monitor down here, can you? So the middle picture here, that's range line. That's kind of the main artery through Joplin. Everything that you see there, I mean, every bit of it was absolutely gone after the tornado. Just absolutely leveled. It cut perpendicular across that road. That's just an average day on range line. And, if this tornado had hit another day, if it had hit on Saturday, if it had hit on a weekday, there would have been a lot more people on that road. We got very lucky when it hit. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, too. And there's graduation. This is an actual picture from that graduation ceremony at Joplin High School, where 7,000 people were. That graduation took place at 5 o'clock, finished at 5:30. This picture was taken at the location, which is an outdoor football stadium at MSSU. They'd moved it from the Joplin High School auditorium because they wanted to invite more people, so they moved it to MSSU football stadium. Look how dark it is behind him. The storm was coming in. The storm hadn't hit when they were there. It was dark. It was black as night there. That's an outdoor picture there. So something was brewing. Well, what was brewing was an EF5 tornado. They don't get any bigger than that. It went through our town, basically right down through the center of it, cut it in half. This is a picture that was taken at 40,000 feet. And you can see the path of it through our town there. Took it down to bare dirt. I mean, you've got, knocking down buildings, that's one thing. Stripping leaves off trees, that's one thing. When you take it down to bare dirt, when you pull the grass out of the ground, that's some suction. The EF5 portion of it lasted for about 6 miles. The tornado, it was considered a tornado for 13 miles. There was wind damage for 21 miles. The 6 miles that it was in EF5 was pretty much tip to tip of Joplin. It was pretty wide, 3/4 of a mile wide at its widest. Since they've been keeping records in the United States, it's the deadliest tornado in the United States. Winds between 200 and 250 miles an hour. It broke some rules. It went way too slow. EF5s go screaming down when they go through. They travel really fast. This didn't. It went exceedingly slow. And it just sat and churned and churned and churned and churned. And everywhere that it went, it took about 12 minutes to pass through a given area. 200 to 250 mile an hour winds for 12 minutes will do a lot of damage. They say that the worst part of it was about 20 minutes. So it caused a lot of damage. If you look at the path here, you'll see, if I can see here, this is St. John's here. As you can see, it got whacked pretty hard there. That's Freeman. That's how close we were. If this whole tornado, there's St. John's, there's Freeman. If the tornado had been slid over a few hundred yards, it would have wiped out both of our hospitals, and we wouldn't have had any health care for 75 miles. So we got very lucky. Our hospital took damage, but we didn't take near the damage that St. John's did. So what will an EF5 do to you? Well, it does a lot of things. All of our cell towers looked like this or worse. This is a semi that got picked up and draped over another one. This is a piece of wood that's drilled through a curb. These things, these white things sticking out of this stucco and metal facade here of Academy, those are 3-foot pieces of styrofoam that are driven into stucco and metal siding. All sorts of crazy stuff like that happen. The forces are just absolutely incredible, which leads to the type of injuries that we'll discuss in a little bit here. So there were 145 people killed directly because of the direct trauma. As of 6/8, they determined that those people had died directly because of the trauma. We had more people who died because of related infections, including some fungal infections that we'll talk about here. 161 dead total because of the tornado itself, which is a miracle, because when you see the pictures, when I tell you what could have happened, the number of people that were involved, it should have been thousands of people, absolutely thousands of people. We had thousands that were injured. This is a semi that was just smashed into this tree. Piling up those cars, it's just absolutely amazing the forces that were involved. People would ask me afterwards, in the days afterwards, well, what does Joplin look like? And the only thing I could describe to them was it looks like a meat grinder. There's no way people should have survived. And the vastness of the area, it's incredible that people survived. We had, of the 25,000 buildings in Joplin, there were 10,000 that were damaged. This is a before and after picture of the same spot. This is an amazing picture to me. This is off of Google Maps. And this is one I didn't do this picture. Someone grabbed this one before it got changed online. This is the exact same intersection. This is a shot taken before, and this is a shot someone took with a camera afterwards in the exact same spot of the same intersection. And just gives you some idea of how that tornado just wiped clean a third of our city, just completely wiped it clean. And look at that. I mean, it just reduced everything to absolute rubble. And there were thousands of people who survived that somehow. Churches. This was my church. This is where I got married. This is where my kids got baptized. The rector house was back here. Our 74-year-old priest rode the storm out in a bathtub. And as you can see, there's pretty much nothing left but the bathtub. And luckily, it was a good old Roman Catholic house. Had a good cast iron tub, and it saved him. Schools. 4,800 of our 7,700 students were displaced. This picture right here, that's the auditorium of the high school. That's where they would have been holding the graduation had they not moved it to MSSU. Again, they wouldn't have had 7,000, but they would have had a few thousand people. And this obviously would not have been a good place to ride out the storm. That's the high school and Franklin Tech there. As you can see, they're just absolutely obliterated. The school system did an incredible job. That this happened, remember, this happened in May. When school started in the fall, we had a place for every student. We didn't have to send them out. Now they used a big old store in the mall. They retrofitted that. They've got temporary trailers that they're using. They've got some old schools that they're using. We also have some of the religious schools, and they were able to open. They got old warehouses and retrofitted them. It's absolutely amazing what the schools were able to do. We had sewer lines that were broke. Our main sewer treatment center was hit, so we had a boil order for several days. Cell phones were down all over the place. The whole city pretty much. You had spotty areas where you could text, and that was about it. And that lasted for quite some time. The power outage, of course, made it hard. Not only have you got everything destroyed, you don't have the power to run power tools to clean up a lot of this stuff. The mail was amazing. Do you know the U.S. Postal Service has their own police force? They do. They showed up with these really neat trucks that had these big satellites on top, and these guys who are dressed out like SWAT guys, and they protect your mail. It was pretty cool. They showed up and they took over the post offices basically for 3 days, and until they got them moved to post offices that weren't injured or weren't destroyed. And I thought it was pretty cool that they were able to get regular mail service back up in just 3 days, as long as you had a place to deliver the mail, obviously. Pets. We don't think about this, but this is something you got to think about in a disaster. Pets are displaced also. And a lot of their owners, the people who provide for them, if they're displaced, separated from them, those animals are just going to be running around loose, and they have to be cared for. There's going to be dead animals all over to be taken care of, to be picked up, and that sort of thing. The Humane Society, the ASPCA, and PetSmart, I can't say enough about them. They came into these 3 old warehouses that we have in town, and they brought in their huge semis, just a caravan of these semis, and they set up, and they were there for 2-3 months after the tornado, and they absolutely, for free, didn't cost the city a thing. They took care of thousands of animals. I mean, all sorts of animals, exotic animals, cats, dogs, and stuff. And they were able to get, I believe the number is 80% of the animals reunited with their owners, which is pretty amazing. Didn't charge those owners a penny for all of that. All the medical care that they had, because the animals were beat up too. It's not just the medical people who had to do work on patients. The vets in town also had to do a lot of work on patients. And I just can't say enough about those 3 organizations. They did a great job. The landfill, a town of 50,000 people, 1/3 of it destroyed, $3 billion worth of insured damage. All of that had to be taken somewhere. What they did actually is they tried to do some staging first. It was too difficult to do. The Corps of Engineers actually came in and took it over, and they were successfully able to stage it in various areas. Then they would separate out all of the debris into things that could be recycled. And the stuff that couldn't be recycled, they're building a huge landfill by Galena, Missouri, that they'll be placing most of that in. But you're talking millions of tons of waste. It's a staggering amount. So right afterwards, we had over 100 outside rescuers who came in the night of the tornado. Now this struck about 5:30, so we had a couple of hours of light, and that's it. By that night, we had 100 trained, registered outside rescue personnel who showed up. It was amazing how quickly people started showing up. We had multiple rescue and cadaver dogs teams that showed up. And to see them work is amazing. It's absolutely amazing. A lot of the initial rescue work went on by flashlight, which it's hard to get around in this sort of stuff during the day. At night, not only that night and to several days afterwards were we taking care of people who were injured in the tornado itself, we treated a lot of people who were search and rescue people who came in, and because of the nature of what they're going through, they'd get cuts, things would fall on them, that sort of thing. So got to have plans for taking care of the people who are out trying to take care of the people. So 3 of the big box stores got wiped out. If you look here, this is Academy, before and after. This is the one that has the styrofoam stuck through the side of it. Home Depot and Walmart were both wiped out. Home Depot is where the largest loss of life was in between these stores. If you ever get in a tornado or any earthquake or something like that, where would be your first place that you'd want to run if you were in the store? Run against one of those big walls. I mean, they're solid. They're going to keep you safe, right? That was the problem. The safe place is actually to run into the stacks, because all the stacks tipped over and they create a triangle. And you've got a triangle of safety there. So run to the base of one of the stacks. Unfortunately, a lot of people, including an entire family, it was a father and his 2 kids went to the wall, and they thought they were safe there, and the wall collapsed on them. Pretty rough stuff. In this talk, I used to talk about specific victims. I knew some of these people, and I took it out because I couldn't get through the darn talk. It was just too personal for that. I used to be a tough guy. Now I had kids. Now I cry all the time. I don't know. So, really the big thing to be learned, though, from these collapses is if you're in one of those places, go to the safe spot, which is in the stacks. As those large stacks tip over, they'll create a safe spot for you. A lot of people did some amazing things. They did some absolutely amazing things after the tornado. There were so many people who were so selfless and gave so much. There's always the other people. There was looting that went on. The military did come in. It was weird going in my town, and there was a curfew. A curfew. You were allowed to be out during the day, but at night, anywhere around the destruction area, there was a curfew. You couldn't go. There were Humvees with soldiers, with guns, and police at every single intersection, all the way around. And of course, our police wasn't a big enough force. There were so many people who came from all over. 400 agencies, I understand, between EMS and police and fire showed up to help. So they cordoned off the whole area. Remember, it went down the center of our city, so you basically have a left and right half. Well, I lived on one side, of course, and had to go to the other side to go to work. And you actually had to get a military escort to go through, and you had to have identification on you and everything. It was really, really strange. It was sad that it got to that because we had the looting that went on, but it did. Crime has gone up. Violent crime has gone up considerably in the years since the tornado. And the assistant police chief just spoke probably 2 months ago about that specifically. And what they have found is the vast majority of the people who are involved in the increase in these violent crimes are people from the outside. You'll see if you ever go through a tornado or any disaster, mass disaster, it's been shown time and time again, there are people who just travel the country following these things, and they make a living off of it because so many good-hearted people and organizations come in with tons and tons and tons of free stuff that they're giving away, that these people just follow these disasters, and they're drifters. They don't have a permanent address. It's just what they do. And, of course, the things that come along with that. So it's unfortunate that you have that, but you have to be prepared for that. If you have a major disaster, you're going to have people who are going to follow. That'd be my wife. Sorry about that. But these are some of the people who did amazing things. These are the survivors here. This guy here, his name is Gabe. He's one of the local police officers. He rescued several people that day, absolutely several. This is one of my favorite things. This is in the neighborhood where one of my best friends lives, and his house was completely destroyed. And this is the same man in both of these pictures, and neither one of these are his kids. It was just neighbors out helping neighbors, and you saw that all over the city. This lady, this is where she rode out the tornado. Look at that little spot right there. As you can tell, everything else in that house is utterly destroyed. Utterly destroyed. That's where she rode it out. That's where she was safe. And I tell you, it's amazing. There were just thousands upon thousands of stories like that. So many people that I grabbed the kids and I took them into the hallway by the washer and dryer, and I laid on top of them. And when it was all over and we got up, that was the only hallway in the house that was still intact. A gentleman who I took care of, that he was outside and he got down between his two cars, and he was holding on to the wheel of one of the cars, and he said that the car was moving and it was dragging him along with it, but he survived it by doing that. The other car was just absolutely destroyed. So many just amazing stories like that. St. John's. This was a very viable, very busy hospital before the storm. This is their helicopter. You could buy it cheap right now. It was outside, obviously, during the storm on the helipad, and it got picked up and thrown around, tossed around. They were actually able to save the engine and the transmission, but other than that, they actually hauled that off on probably this size, a trailer that they were able to haul that off, and it's a huge medical helicopter. It was just amazing how bad that got beat up. They had 183 people that they evacuated. They had 188 patients in the hospital when the tornado hit. 5 of them died. Those 5 patients that died were patients that were in the ICU and were on ventilators. And they, of course, when they lost power, they were able to bag some of the people. Those people, the rooms were destroyed so badly that they couldn't get to them in time, and those people died because they had no way to breathe on their own. There was one visitor who died. He was actually coming across the parking lot here, going into right along here, to go into, that's the entrance to their emergency room right there. He was with his wife and mother-in-law. Mother-in-law was sick. He was taking her to the emergency room. The storm was coming. They could see it coming towards them. He got them into the emergency room. There was an elderly person still out in the parking lot. He went back out to help them, and an SUV fell out of the sky and landed on him. This is a shot. That's St. John's in the distance there. It's amazing. You couldn't see that before from there. I mean, there's no way you'd be able to see it. There are so many structures and buildings and trees and everything else. When you go through a tornado, one of the things, no matter where you are, people will comment on is lack of trees. There's no trees left. All the trees are gone. And the trees that are left are ugly trees because they got no branches on them anymore. They're just a trunk and the big limbs. It's just amazing. They were able to, that night, they set up in Memorial Hall, which is the Civic Center, and they were able to treat patients there. They set up basically a triage center there. Triage centers sprung up around town, and they were able to, shortly thereafter, set up basically these MASH tents that they operated out of for months. But they essentially became a non-entity. They couldn't take trauma patients. They basically became a glorified clinic. But they did a great job. I'm not trying to cut down on them at all. The fact that they were able to do anything healthcare-wise was amazing. And they were able to do it shortly after the storm. This is an x-ray, obviously. They found x-rays and medical records in Springfield from St. John's, which is 75 miles away. It's amazing. So, with us, you'd be amazed at how much you miss your cell phone. When you have no cell service all of a sudden, and you want to get a hold of your family, you want to get a hold of other people, and you can't. Elevators. Elevators lift heavy things, like supplies from Central Supply. If Central Supply isn't on the same level as the ER, when you go to generator power, at least in Missouri, you can't run elevators when you're on generator power, which really sucks, because then you got to do bucket brigade carrying everything up the steps. So if you're designing a new hospital, good to put all the things that you're going to need on a disaster all on the same level. We initially, well, to finish my earlier story, I'm walking out of the ER to go on home, go through, see what that loud sound was, head on home. And I'm walking through, and one of our charge nurses, she's been a charge nurse, she's been an ER nurse for 25 years, so she's pretty salty. She's seen pretty much everything. And as I'm walking out, I hear her say, and she's not a woman who curses, she says, "I need an effing doctor." Wonder what that is. So I thought I should go see. And she comes wheeling around the corner with a gentleman in a wheelchair, and he's been eviscerated. And his intestines are hanging out in his lap. Thought maybe I should hang around for a little while. So I grab him, take him to one of our trauma bays. Luckily, one of our trauma surgeons happened to be down seeing another patient and was in another trauma bay close by. I grabbed him. Being the highly trained, very astute physicians we are, we said, he needs to go to surgery. So I grabbed the gentleman, spun him around backwards, and was taking him back to the OR. And I said, "What happened to you?" And he said, it was the tornado. I was hit by something. I was out in the parking lot. I got hit by something. And I said, "Tornado? What are you talking about?" He said, "It's the tornado. St. John's is gone." What are you talking about? St. John's is gone. This is a 7-story, huge building. There's no way that, what are you talking about? It's gone. Everything's gone. Got him back to the OR. Last 2 things he said to me, he said, I'm going to die, aren't I? And I said, no, you're 27 years old. You're healthy, otherwise you're going to be just fine. And he said, get a hold of my mom for me. And I couldn't because there were no cell phones. And he died the next morning. So initially, we got walking wounded. I took that gentleman. By the time I got back from the OR, there were people just streaming in, just walking wounded. People, everybody dirty, wet, bloody, just amazing, all the people very close to us. And then a little while later, then half an hour or so, we started getting the 4-wheel drive pickup trucks. And that originally is all we were able to get was patients by 4-wheel drive because there was stuff everywhere. And they were the only vehicles that could get through. Luckily, there's a National Guard unit half a mile up the road. They're an MP unit, which helped, and a heavy equipment unit, which helped. They were able to get bulldozers out and just push a single lane through the road and get access to the hospital for ambulances when they started to arrive. It's just amazing. I don't mean to make this a preachy thing, but there are so many places where in this tornado that there was just fingerprints of God that it could have been so much worse for us. So for Freeman, we had 467 registered patients in the first 12 hours and estimated 250 more that didn't get registered because initially, when they started coming in, we had no way to identify them. A lot of that 250 were unresponsive, had no ID on them whatsoever. We didn't have, electronic medical record. How many of you got electronic medical record? Wonderful, great thing, right? Love going through that training. But it is a wonderful tool as long as you've got the electronic part of electronic medical record, right? So we had no way to put patients into the system. We had in our hospital some experience with some mass casualties before this. We'd had a couple of tornadoes previously, one that gave us 100 patients. It was 100 patients total. That's a lot of patients. Had a group home fire that gave us a bolus of about 30 patients. Had some mass pileups on the highway that had given us 20, 30 patients. So we had decided since the biggest one we'd gotten was 100, we'd get 150 of these ID tags. We had them in our disaster closet. All right, 150. That's 50% above what we've had. We should be good. We treated 1,200 patients in the first 2 days. And the other thing is with the disaster closet, you don't want people sneaking in there and stealing all the good stuff, so you restrict access to 2 people who have keys to the disaster closet. They're both out of town. We've changed that since. It's amazing to me, and I'm very impressed and very proud of my colleagues that we took care of 1,200 patients in the first 2 days of the storm, and we had 11 fatalities. 11 fatalities, and only 1 was preventable. All the rest of those were black tags or people who had such massive injuries that they just didn't survive, like the eviscerated gentleman. The one that was preventable was a young man, also 27 years old, broke his pelvis. We got pelvic binders on him. We got 6 units of blood into him before we ran out of blood. He could have, we didn't have the capability of a very complex pelvic fracture. We didn't have anyone who could fix that complex of a pelvic fracture in our facility. 75 miles away, we could. Before the weather cleared enough that we could get a helicopter out, before we had ambulances that could get him there, he bled out. So I'm very proud that only 1 preventable death out of 1,200 patients, many of those trauma patients. We had a lot of people respond. Our official hospital policy is, if there's a disaster, wait at home. If we need you, we will call you. We want this to be orderly. Very good thing that a lot of people said, bull crap, I'm going to the hospital. Because we had no way to contact them. No way. Otherwise, people would have just waited. We had people, one of our trauma surgeons lived about 1.5 miles from the hospital. His house was hit. He was actually taking his dogs outside, he said, and he opened up or they were outside, he was bringing them back in. He opened up his sliding door to call the dogs back in. He said his ears started popping. Thought that was kind of weird. And then his ears started popping, 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 and he knew something bad was going to happen. He said it suddenly got really cold, the temperature dropped, he knew something bad was going to happen. And he told his family they got down in the basement. House was absolutely destroyed. He had to crawl out of the basement, walked 1.5 miles, and did surgeries that night. One of our neurosurgeons was in IHOP. The people who survived in IHOP got into the refrigerator at IHOP. They closed the door behind them and wrote it out. She got out of that, walked until she was able to get a ride, and then came in and did brain surgery that night. So many people did those sorts of things that they put their jobs ahead. Once they knew their families were safe, they put their jobs ahead of their personal lives. And it's amazing. It's not just here. That sort of thing happens in disasters. Trust your people. They'll do good things. We had several patients employees who lost property. We did lose 2 employees, unfortunately. One was actually on her way to work. Her shift wasn't until 7. She'd been a nurse for 20 years. She was very dedicated. She was actually coming in early to work. If she hadn't, she wouldn't have been caught in the tornado. Ozark Center for Autism was totally destroyed. Very specialty care. How do you take care of those patients? It was actually a godsend for them. Because it got out in the news, they actually got more funding. They actually are in a better facility now, and they're treating more patients than they did before the tornado. Ozark Center, which is our outpatient psych facility, they previous to the tornado, they took about 500 calls a month. After the tornado, they were taking 100 calls a day. The psychological stress is just amazing with any of these mass casualties. The regional response was amazing. Our hospital was where they brought everyone, but once we were able to start to get ambulances out, we took patients in, stabilized them as best we could, and the ones that, once we were full, that we would send out. And the regional response, these are mostly, other than towards the bottom there, those upper hospitals are all itty-bitty little hospitals. And it was just amazing that they were able to take care of the people and flex up and do the job that they did. So there were delayed medical hardships. Not only was the hospital wiped out, lots of dentist's office, lots of outpatient physician offices were wiped out. And it was weeks, months for some of these before they got back up. Well, people lost everything. Not only did they lose their jewelry and their clothes and stuff, they also lost their medications. And their doctor lost everything he had, including his office. How are they going to get their blood pressure medications? How are they going to get their psych medications? How are they going to get their antibiotics? Well, initially it was the ER. There was actually an executive order that was signed by the governor that allowed pharmacies to fill those scripts for a limited period of time for people who didn't have a prescription in hand, and that was vital. It was absolutely vital. So you need to have some plan in place locally with your pharmacies to give those people their medications when their doctor's not able to write that for them. So this is a woman who came in from the tornado. Down by her buttock, she had just a little itty-bitty little wound. Didn't look bad at all. She kept complaining of this horrible back pain. Well, they did a CAT scan, and they found there's something in there. They got in there, and they found this huge piece of wood that had been driven several inches up inside of her by her spine, and that's what it was. And remember, it was an itty-bitty little wound. That's all she had on the outside. That's the kind of forces we're talking about when you're talking about 250 miles an hour, these things hitting you. The wounds were incredible. They're military-type wounds that we were seeing. Lots of penetrating injuries. You guys may have heard about the fungus. We had other infections also, more common infections, but we did have what was called the fungal infection, this mucormycosis. There were 18 suspected and 13 confirmed cases of this by the CDC. It led to 5 people dying. This wasn't the first time it was shown. People were saying, oh, this weird fungus that's going on, this is the first time it's ever been seen. It actually hadn't been seen. It's actually been, it's ubiquitous. It's in the soil all over the world. They saw it after this particular strain of ours was actually seen after the tsunami, and it has been seen in tornadoes before. The reason that you see it in tornadoes is it needs a little oxygen, but not much. So it needs to be driven a little ways into the tissue. So you need enough force that it'll penetrate the tissues, but not deep enough that it doesn't get any oxygen. And people that are most susceptible to this are older people, young people, diabetics, but also people on iron. Iron is a vital cofactor in its reproductive cycle. Unfortunately, a lot of older people are on iron, and you're just feeding this thing. Another thing you need to wipe out all the other bacteria so that this thing can overgrow. Well, these people came in with, I mean, we had hundreds of people stitching that night. I mean, you can't imagine the amount of wound care that went on that night. So what did we do with that? We did what you do with any wounds. We irrigated them out, closed them up, put them on broad-spectrum antibiotics. Well, for most of the wounds, that's exactly what you would normally do. The problem is we weren't treating these like battlefield wounds like we should have in retrospect. And for some of these people, we were making it worse. A small number, but important. This woman, as you can see, this was the original injury right there. She had a penetrating injury right there. 4 days later, this is what it looked like. And this will show you how quickly, once this gets established, how it just spreads like wildfire. 48 hours after debridement. Do you see this stuff here? That's not some weird effect of light. That's actually mold. That's fuzz, just like grows on bread, that's growing on her skin. After the second debridement, you can see she's already got an area that's attacking the bone. And this is 24 hours after the second debridement. All of that is mold. It's fuzzy mold, just like on your bread. It's growing on her skin, in the wound. This is another patient. The important thing here to show you how fast this spreads. That woman died. This patient also died. 5:31, okay? That's how big it is. 5:31. That's later that's later the same day. And look how much it spread from there to there in a matter of hours. This patient also succumbed. The patients who got it in multiple wounds. So what can you do to help this? Well, wide debridement. Heal with steel, right? You got to just cut as wide a margins as you can with this. Try and get to good edges. Even when you get to good bleeding edges, we still were having people who it was still extending beyond what we thought was good tissue. There's some research that says hyperbaric therapy is good, but the problem with hyperbaric therapy, the question is it really the hyperbaric therapy, or would those people have survived anyway? Hyperbaric therapy takes days to do, right? I mean, it's repeated dives. This stuff spreads so quickly that probably the people who improved with it probably would have survived anyway. So amphotericin is really the only antifungal. All the other antifungals have been, in case reports, have been proven not to work. Amphotericin seems to be the only one that works. It's really hard on the liver. That's why they call it amphoterrible. Rifampin, in a very small, limited case study, seems to show that it has a synergistic effect, and so it may be that rifampin and amphotericin are the treatment for this. But the people you're treating are mostly old people who their livers may not be able to take the amphotericin anyway. So in tornadoes, you should be treating the wounds like battlefield wounds. Battlefield literature shows that 65% of the wounds do not need to be treated initially. 65% of them will survive 1 week without any medical care. Irrigate them, let them open, let them heal by secondary intention. We were splinting everything when they first started coming in. We were x-raying everything. I mean, you don't need to x-ray everything. If they've got an angulated femur, you know it's broke, right? As long as they've got good sensation, they've got good pulses, splint it. They're a secondary patient now. They're later. You can get to them later. It's an amazing thing when you find out that open femur fractures are minor injuries, and that's what they became that night. you got to preserve your resources for the people who need them for life-threatening injuries. So real quick, I want to go through these drills. We've all had disaster drills. We actually had a disaster drill just a few days before it was a statewide disaster drill. And in the disaster, a tornado was hit, or a hospital was hit in an earthquake. It was coincidentally named St. John's. It was in Springfield. But the whole hospital wasn't wiped out. That's kind of ridiculous to assume that a whole hospital is going to get wiped out until it does happen. When you do drills and you're working in the department, you hate it because it's extra work and you're taking care of fake patients and real patients, so we try to schedule them around times that we're not real busy. That's not when you should do it. You should be scheduling your drills at your peak hours and make it as stressful as possible, and don't tell the people who are working that the drill is coming. Because if you don't tell them the drill is coming and you tell them, hey, we've got 14 trauma patients that are coming in on top of what you've got already, their initial response is going to be the truest response that you're going to have. If you stress the system to the point of breaking when you're training, when you actually have a disaster, you'll be better prepared for it. Vital equipment. We ran out of ventilators. We ran out of chest tubes. One of our surgeons went past our trauma room, and I was putting this little 24-gauge chest tube into this guy's chest, and blood was coming out of it, obviously a hemothorax. He's like, why did you put that in? I said, it's the last one we got. Until other hospitals started sending supplies, there's about the 3.5-hour mark when other ambulances from outside places started arriving. They were bringing supplies with them, which is incredibly vital. Overstock. Have plans regionally to restock your hospitals in the event of a disaster. Manage your human resources. People to be doing security, people to be bringing food, people to be giving breaks, that sort of thing. You absolutely need food. It wasn't until the next morning, about 4 o'clock in the morning, that someone brought by a little bag of the little bags of chips and some water that those of us in the ER realized we hadn't eaten, we hadn't drank, we hadn't taken a break, we hadn't anything, and all of a sudden we were all just wiped out. Have people whose job is to take care of the people taking care of the people. Make sure they get food, make sure they get some water, make sure they get pee breaks, make sure that they go take breaks away from the patient area 5, 10, 15 minutes to get a mental and emotional break from where it's at. They're not going to want to do that. All of us, everybody here, by the nature of what we do, we're not geared to step away when there's more people that are injured, need to be taken care of. But you have to do that. Otherwise, you're going to burn your people out. Central supply organization. We have changed how we put our central supply, how it's organized. It used to be the stuff that we use most commonly, the stuff that's used every day, that's all kind of up front and that's all organized. The way we do it now is we have it in sections, that whole sections of it can be taken out, and the stuff that is needed in the OR, the stuff that is needed in the ER can all be moved en masse in a disaster situation, because we had a bucket brigade going and trying to find stuff, and that night it was just a nightmare. Plan your design not about the most daily convenient, but when the worst thing that hits you, make sure that your central supply is still able to function then. I know I'm running a little long. I'll try to get through this quickly. Every state has medical caches. They have medicines and supplies that can be brought into a disaster situation, either by plane or by ground. Make sure you have good relationships with those people. Local resupplies. Make sure your other hospitals can do just what our hospitals did over in Springfield and the other places, that they will send you supplies knowing that you're going to need them. If you don't need them, you can always send them back. Identification was huge. Have some sort, keep it simple. When you lose all the fancy stuff, keep it simple. Something that you can do with rocks and sticks to identify people. This is how we had it that night. This is obviously not one of the patients, so I'm not breaking any rules here. This is an employee of ours. But this is how everybody was identified. One of our radiologists, I feel so bad for him, John Williams, there's so many positive CAT scan findings that he was running into the ER trying to find somebody with, he'd have a positive finding, say, I'm trying to find the guy with a cut on his head in the green sweater. Okay, there's 1,000 people here. Trying to find that is amazing. So control your access to the ER and have ways to identify them. What we've gone to is this wristband sort of thing here. We've ordered a lot more than 150 of them now. And the nice thing is they can be written on, and they also have a kind of like an old credit card thing that you slide. It has a number right along there that can be tracked. And no one else gets that number. That number can go up to as big as you need it to be. And we've actually started using those for all of our Jane and John Does that come in, so that now that we're using it for all of those Jane and John Does, this system, when a disaster happens, it won't be a new system for people to learn. It'll be just ramping up an existing system. Okay, I know I'm long, so I'll just leave it at this. Trust your people. They're going to do good jobs. In disaster after disaster, the people step up. They do their jobs. Do what you can for who you can. Take care of the people taking care of the people. And keep your responses flexible and simple. Simple is better than complex. We can take some questions now.